You're now watching a clip from the Inspired by show. You can watch the full episode on our YouTube channel or listen on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So make sure to head over there, leave us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed it, and follow the show. Done an incredible job of raising money for Women's Refuge, and they were a huge part of your journey. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Women's Refuge and why you're so passionate to help them now.
Well, years ago, I went to a refuge and I lived there for 6 months I'd actually split from the abuser in that situation, but he kept following me around. And I was watching a morning program and they were talking about it, and I was like, oh my God, they're talking about my entire life. And I went and I called them that morning. I said to my boss, this is happening. And my boss knew, because this guy kept coming to my workplaces. They kept moving me and he kept coming. And I said, look, this is what's happening. You see it. Here he is. He'd probably come later on today. I said, I've got to get away. So, and I was staying at my mum's, and he would, anyway, all this stuff was going on. And I just called them and I just said, I need help. And the next day they came and met me, and I lived there for 6 months. And that was, when I say tough, it was easier living in an abusive relationship than it was living in a refuge. And that's not because Refuge is doing anything bad. It's because you've finally faced up to what's happening. There are all these other women, children living in, I can't talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about it too much. And actually it's people's lives as well. But, it's not an easy, they're not luxury houses. Let's put it that way. They do their best, but you're just every day faced with, this is what I need to deal with now. This is what I need to sort out. And they helped me in a massive way. It was a space to clear my head. I still went to work. I was getting some counselling, and it was just a space to clear my head and just figure out, what do I want and what am I going to do next? And what did I do next? Got into another bloody abusive relationship. But it was a different type of abuse. I didn't know. So you do all of this stuff, and it's so ingrained, was so ingrained for me by that point, is that I was like, well, he's not hitting me, but that's not the point. It's but why Refuge? Well, they helped me, and I've always believed in giving back. My singing teacher, Mary, I was still having singing lessons with Mary at this point, and she knew a little bit about what was going on. And there were times when I wasn't even able to pay for my singing lessons, which was like the most important thing in my life at that point, because I was paying rent at the Refuge and rent somewhere else, so I didn't have the money. And she said to me, Carrie, when I was learning to sing and when I was starting my career, someone helped me, and I've always believed in paying it forward, and so I'm going to help you as long as when your turn comes around, you do the same thing. And so one of the things that I think about every time I pay it forward in whatever way it is, even buying a coffee for a homeless person, this is what Mary did for me. So it's my turn.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing when we just come across people that are just so giving?
Yeah.
And you're going to get me going now, but when you've had such a shit show, to be honest, like you've had such a shit deck constantly, and you're like, come on, when is the good stuff going to come? Yeah. And people think the good stuff comes in a big paycheck or a great job or a great client or a windfall, and actually it can be the smallest act of kindness.
Yeah.
That makes the difference.
Yeah, and but it's also about taking ownership for the shit that's happened, because we make choices. When you get to a certain age, when I got to 30, I was like, I can't blame my mum's situation anymore. I can't blame my granddad. I can't blame my dad. I can't blame anyone else. It's time for me to take responsibility, and it's taken until now. So this is like 17 years in now, But yeah, it is, as you say, it's the small things, because we can all do big gestures. That's really easy, but it's the thoughtful things that make the difference.
Yeah. And one of the things I love, Carrie, with what you've done is you've got this immense story. Like, I love that you're giving us the opportunity to hear it. And I'm really grateful for you opening up, because I think there are so many people that need to hear this. That's why this platform exists. Yeah. But I've heard you talk about it on stage. You've ran concerts where you combine your singing with this story. And you share so openly about things that have happened. And you shared recently a gig that you did for Refuge where I was there, and I was like, yes, Carrie. It was just the most beautiful thing. And you shared openly for the first time one of the big things that happened with your granddad and your grandmother. If you're open to sharing here, I think Absolutely. Some people need to hear the stories, but also the way you've, like we said, broken that chain or that impact.
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, my granddad was a paedophile, certainly abused my mum, possibly other siblings. We don't know who else, no idea. And he had come from Trinidad and had another family there, so possibly that was the history. I don't know. It's all speculation. But he was a singer. He was a great entertainer. He travelled all around the UK and other countries, and was a loved guy. And when he died, he had there's so many trigger warnings to this story. But when he died, he'd actually committed suicide. I don't think I shared that in the most recent gig, but he'd committed suicide, and the police had come round to tell my grandmother that they'd found his body. He jumped off a bridge, actually close to this studio, and they'd found his body, and it was the middle of the night, and my mum was 13 at the time, and she got up to let the police in because my nan didn't get out of bed. And what they discovered was that before he'd committed suicide, he'd actually murdered my nan, and my mum found her, and with the police, and she'd been murdered. Now there's another part to this story. One of my aunts could have also been murdered, but she fortunately lived in another house at the time. She lived with her grandmother, so my great grandmother, and had been invited to come and spend the night, and she didn't. So she's now still alive, thankfully. So it could have been a double murder, but this, it's really difficult to share, even though this is like the third or fourth time that I've shared it in my entire life, right? Publicly. But, domestic abuse, domestic violence is the biggest killer of women in the UK. Not heart disease, not cancer, domestic violence. And it's not talked about nearly enough. And every time there's going to be someone in the comments saying it happens to men too, we know. We're not negating the fact that it happens to all genders. The fact is, whether you want to believe it or not, male on female abuse is the biggest killer of women in the UK, possibly many, many other places. And it's got to be addressed. It's got to be addressed. Who knows if my nan knew that was going to happen to her? My aunt thinks that she kind of had an idea that it was going to happen to her, but who knows if my nan thought that? I don't know. And how many other women, how many women that we've met, how many women that are going through it, And I've got friends who know my history, and they say, well, it's their own fault, they go back, but you don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know what's going on for that person. It's such a complex, it's like drug addiction. It's such a complex situation, but it's got to be addressed now. And that's the reason that I'm so passionate about Refuge. They helped me. And they weren't around when my nan was murdered. They started in the 70s. They weren't around, and it started with one person opening her house to one woman. And now it's a huge charity. So,
I got goosebumps there where you shared that. And I've said to you before, and I'll say it publicly here, I'm so up for helping in whatever way I can with you, because I am very lucky that it's never happened to me. But every time I hear stories like this, like I'm sure we've talked about this before, but my blood boils because I get so furious hearing that people are in these situations because they don't know a way out.
Yeah, exactly.
They feel trapped. And I know you've got personal experience of that, but you've seen it in your family as well. And for me, I think it's important that people who are listening, watching, or passing this on to people is you're never trapped. I know you feel like that, and you might be trapped by choice, like we spoke about. You might not know another way out, but there's always another option. We just don't often see it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone that's maybe listening or watching, that's maybe had this experience and feeling like that right now?
Tell someone. It's really difficult to talk about. It's really difficult to admit. You're going to feel ashamed. You're going to feel guilty. There are people who are going to judge you, but it's okay. Tell somebody, because even if at the time that you tell them you don't feel particularly supported, at some point you will. It took for me to watch a TV show, and my best friend for years had been telling me to get out, stop dating these guys, stop doing this. That's not what it's about. It's about feeling heard, knowing that you've got somewhere to turn to, and knowing that there eventually is somewhere that's safe. So just tell somebody.